Today we're talking with Ari Whitten. He is all things mitochondria. And if you don't know what the mitochondria is, it's a cute little energy center of the cell. So it does a lot more than that, but he really breaks down what the mitochondria is, what they do, how people have poor mitochondrial function, how to increase the mitochondrial function. Really just so many things like why is it important to have this? What supplements are good for supporting the mitochondria? So let's dive in.
Hi, Ari.
Hey, Becky. Hey, Crystal. How are you guys?
Hi, good. How are you?
Great. Nice to connect with you.
You too.
Yes, you too.
Hey, you know Debbie Bright, right?
Yeah.
She's one of my really good friends, and she's talked about
nice.
it quite a lot to me. So
nice. Yeah, she's great.
She is. She's a sweetheart.
Mm-hmm.
So we were just shopping for mitochondria t-shirts because we do reels for our guests. Like we like to, promote the episode, and we found the funniest stuff.
Really?
Yeah.
We did. I'd be curious to see what you found.
That they have t-shirts about the mitochondria, but they do, and they're banging.
What did they say?
The one we got says mitochondria, and it shows.
I'm gonna show it to you.
Nice.
So funny.
We got to keep it fun,
Oh, nice. That's sweet. With the sunglasses.
You gotta get one. You gotta get one of those.
Great.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. We're so happy to have you.
Yes, I'm happy to be here. Hold on one second.
Okay.
I have a little bit of a situation here because we have some guests in our guest house, and we have other guests in our house right now. So I'm sleeping in my office at the moment.
Oh my
goodness.
Looks
really comfortable.
A little bit of my bed and a little bit of my dog crate. One of my dogs.
I love it. You got to improvise.
Yeah.
Keeping it real.
Yeah. I'm in my office all by myself.
Oh my gosh. So you have a full house, you said. Just guests, family visiting?
It's all friends, actually. We have friends staying in our guest house, they're building their own house here, and it's been months of delay. So they've been kind of stuck in our guest house for months longer than planned. And then because of that, now we have other guests who should be staying in our guest house, but are now in my bedroom and relegating me to my office.
You're so nice.
You are. Very nice. Well, let's dive in. Are you ready?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So let's first start off talking about the mitochondria. What is it, and what exactly do they do?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Oh, we're jumping in right. Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I thought that was the
we already
interview discussion.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So do you want to do that again?
Yeah.
So we're live. We're live, Ari. We're just rolling. So
okay, let's do it. Okay. So you want to talk about the role of mitochondria in relationship to fatigue?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. And like for the first question, like what even is the mitochondria for those that don't know?
Okay, great. Let's start there. So mitochondria are our cellular energy generators. You remember learning about them in high school or college biology classes, where they were framed as the powerhouse of the cell. They're one of the cellular organelles, and this is the powerhouse of the cell. This is where energy is generated. And in that context, there's a couple things that are important to note. One is the way they framed it was kind of like, oh, it's just one of, a dozen different organelles that plays a role in the cell. The truth is that mitochondria are way more important than that. They're critically important to the overall health of the organism, to disease prevention, to longevity, and the things we do with our lifestyle and in our environment have a major impact on our mitochondria, as we're going to talk about. The second thing that's critical to understand, that's more of an insight within the last 5 or 10 years, that's very different from what we all learned in high school and college biology courses, is in those courses, mitochondria were typically framed as these kind of mindless energy generators that sort of just take in carbs and fats and pump out energy in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And it's true that they do serve that energy generation role. But the new insight in the last 5 or 10 years, largely thanks to the work of a brilliant scientist named Dr. Robert Naviaux at the University of California, San Diego, who runs a lab for mitochondrial medicine there. And he's done some groundbreaking work on people with chronic fatigue syndrome and autistic children, is something that he's termed the cell danger response. And the key insight that has come out of this is, in his words, that mitochondria are not just these mindless energy generators. They are, in his words, the central hub of the wheel of metabolism. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that in addition to their role as energy generators, they are also environmental sensors and energy regulators. So in other words, they don't just take in carbs and fats and pump out energy. They decide whether or not they should be taking in carbs and fats and pumping out energy. And the way they are doing that is by constantly sampling what's going on in the body, what's going on in the environment. Are we in a sort of danger-free, stress-free environment, a peaceful environment where I can operate in, I'm speaking as the mitochondria here, where I can operate in energy mode in peacetime metabolism and focus all my efforts on pumping out lots of energy? Or are we under attack? Mm-hmm. And if we're under attack by various kinds of stressors that we can talk about, then I'm going to shift my resources towards cell defense, and I'm going to turn down the dial on energy production. So it's critically important to understand, and this is really the key insight, to understand your energy levels, whether you have high energy levels or low energy levels. It's largely a function of the degree to which your mitochondria are deciding to operate in peacetime metabolism or wartime metabolism. And that is a function of what kind of environment they are sensing. Okay, so stated more simply, your energy levels are a reflection of the degree to which your mitochondria are either pumping out energy or switched into cell defense mode.
So what causes poor mitochondrial function? I know you touched on it a little bit, but can you expand on that?
Yeah. So almost every type of stressor that you can think up, from poor nutrition to, alcohol consumption, to cigarette smoking, to psychological stress, any source of psychological stress, whether it's relationships or work or whatever, to toxins, environmental toxicants, to sleep deprivation and circadian rhythm disruption, to being sedentary, to any other type of stressor that you can imagine. It can all be sensed by the mitochondria. And that might sound far-fetched to think, well, how could the mitochondria possibly be sensing all of these different types of things? And the way that works is basically every type of stressor essentially results in a few different pathways of how it's actually negatively affecting the body. One is oxidative stress or oxidative damage, and another is increased inflammatory cytokines, increased inflammation, or just cellular damage. Sometimes things just directly promote cellular damage. Usually that is co-occurring with increased inflammation and oxidative stress. So they're all somewhat related. They all tend to overlap and occur together. But mitochondria basically can directly sense reactive oxygen species. They can sense oxidative stress. They can sense inflammatory cytokines, and they can sense the presence of cellular damage. They can also sense what's called in Dr. Robert Naviaux's research, what he calls purinergic signaling. They can sense the presence of ATP and ADP free floating in the environment, extracellular, floating around the blood or outside the cells where it shouldn't be. ATP and ADP are supposed to be inside of your cells. But when you incur cellular damage from any one of these different types of stressors that I mentioned before, cells start to get damaged and then they become leaky. And some of these contents leak out, ATP, ADP. And as they start to float around in the body, the mitochondria actually have receptors to pick up on that. And then they go, oh, there's damage occurring in the body. We need to shift out of energy mode, out of peacetime metabolism, and shift resources towards defense mode, turn down the dial on energy production. So again, basically every type of stressor you can dream up can be directly or indirectly sensed by the mitochondria.
That's so amazing. It's so amazing how the body works. My gosh.
And does age and gender play a role?
Gender, I don't know. Sometimes there are gender differences that pop up. I was just reading some longevity studies on a couple different supplements, and some of them showed effects of, where it boosted longevity in women, but not men, or in sometimes in animal studies in male rats, but not female rats. Sometimes you see those kinds of things emerge, and often they don't have a clear explanation of what could account for that mechanistically. But in terms of mitochondria and what I'm talking about here, it is known that women are more likely to suffer from chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. So women may be relating to hormones, some kind of unique susceptibility to being sort of shut down, having energy mode shut down in this way. So I don't know. I think there's very little research on that to speak of. And as far as age, there is certainly a role of age. If I can go into a bit of explanation here in the answer, it's a bit of a long one, but an interesting one that may lead to some other discussions. So it's known that between the ages of 40 to 70, most people lose half of their mitochondrial capacity. Okay. And it's likely that between the ages of 20 to 40, we see a similar cutting in half of mitochondrial capacity. So stated differently, or if I can add a layer to this, we have between a few hundred to a few thousand mitochondria in virtually all of the trillions of cells in our body. And those mitochondria are responsible for producing virtually all of the energy for those trillions of cells. So if you lose half, or 75% between the ages of 20 to 70, 75% of your mitochondrial capacity, that's obviously a huge deal in terms of your energy producing capacity. But there's this other role of mitochondria as well, which is what I explained before in cell defense. Now, a nice way to understand that there's a relationship between your mitochondrial capacity and your ability to handle various kinds of stressors and maintain homeostasis, maintain health and abundant energy levels. So we know that, just big picture, we know that kids are often bouncing off the walls with energy nonstop. We know that older people are often very fatigued. Okay. So there's clearly, just on a common sense level, a relationship there. Now, there's this other layer, which is we're losing 50 to 75% of our mitochondrial capacity in our adult years as we get towards 70 years old. Now, those mitochondria function in this cell defense role. And the more mitochondria you have, and the bigger their capacity, so the bigger and stronger they are, the more of them that you have, the easier they can handle a given workload and get that job done of adapting to that stress, or handling the oxidative stress from whatever stressor it is, putting out the fires, and maintaining health and high energy levels. And the more that you lose mitochondrial capacity as you age, the more difficult that job becomes. This is what I call the resilience threshold. Okay. And as an analogy, as a way of thinking about this and understanding it on a very common sense level, let's say, we're the three of us are physically together right now. And let's say right over there down the street, there's a building on fire. Okay. Is it going to be easier for me to go put that fire out by myself, or for all three of us and maybe, 5 other people to go put that fire out together? Right. Obviously, having more people allows us to get that job done much more easily. Now, if I go try to fight it by myself, or maybe even the three of us by ourselves, instead of having 5 or 10 other people, maybe it's just too big of a fire. It's raging out of control. We're trying as hard as we can to, get buckets of water and dump it on there. And we're working our butts off. But we're dying from the exhaustion and the heat, and eventually the fire burns down the building and we don't successfully put it out. Okay. That's now exceeded our capacity to do that work. That was a stressor that exceeded our capacity to handle it and maintain homeostasis. We didn't successfully put out the fire. So now it resulted in some kind of negative effect, which often manifests in terms of our subjective experience as symptoms. So having a high level of mitochondrial capacity, like children do, is critical to putting out the fires of the stresses in your life and maintaining homeostasis and high energy levels. Okay, so the last layer to understand here is, some people might be thinking at this point, well, that sucks that we lose 50 to 75% of our mitochondrial capacity as we age. And they might think this is just a normal product of the aging process. But we also know that it isn't a normal product of the aging process. It is actually the result of lack of hormetic stress in your life. Okay. If you've ever broken a bone and, an arm or leg or something like that, and you've had a cast on for 6 or 8 weeks, you get that cast off, and what do you immediately notice? Well, there's 2 things you notice. One is that the arm or the leg is way hairier than the other side. And I have no explanation for why that happens.
A little dirty.
Yeah. It's like it's 2 or 3 times as hairy as the other side. But
smells a little,
Yeah, there's something about darkness and hair growth. I don't know. But the main thing you'll notice is that it's half the size as the other one. The muscles shrink, they atrophy from not being used. And so the body is concerned with survival, and it is ruthlessly, mercilessly good about getting rid of any energy demanding tissues or cells that are not needed for survival. So literally within a matter of a few weeks, if you just stop using some muscles, that muscle will shrink to half the size in 2 months, So this same exact thing is happening at the cellular level, at the mitochondrial level. If you don't challenge your mitochondria, if you don't stimulate them, if you don't ask them to do work, then they shrink, they atrophy, they shrivel, they literally die off. So you have fewer mitochondria. So that is actually the reason why most people lose 50 to 75% of their mitochondrial capacity with age. And the reason that we know that with certainty, that it's not just a natural byproduct of the aging process, is that when we look at 70-year-olds who are lifelong athletes and exercisers, they have the same mitochondrial capacity as 40-year-olds. So it is the lack of hormetic stress, and we can talk about what that means, the lack of hormetic stress, of challenges to the mitochondria, that causes them to atrophy, to shrink, to shrivel. And the more that happens, the smaller your mitochondria get, the fewer of them that they have, the weaker they become, the more easily they become overwhelmed, just like the putting out the fire analogy, the more easily they become overwhelmed with the stressors of life. And if those stressors of life exceed the resilience threshold of your mitochondria, their capacity to handle that and maintain homeostasis, then you get symptoms, then you get fatigue.
So
Does that make sense?
Can you define hormetic stress for people who don't know?
Yeah. So hormetic stress is basically transient metabolic stress. And we typically think this word stress has a very negative connotation. We think, oh, stress bad, we need to avoid that. the truth is that our body needs certain kinds of stress, and in the proper dosages, in order to function normally, we require certain types of stress. And the absence of this positive stress, you could say, actually causes our body to break down and degenerate.
Yeah. Which some people refer to as eustress, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So eustress, EU for people listening, rather than
yeah, eustress,
YOU stress.
right.
Basically, there are many different types of hormetic stressors. Exercise and all the subtypes of exercise, resistance training to endurance training to high intensity interval and sprint interval training, to heat exposure like saunas or exercising in hot temperatures, to cold exposure, to fasting, to breath hold practices. And then there's also other categories of chemical substances and phytochemicals that are called xenohormetic substances that also act on some of the same pathways. These having layers of these different kinds of hormetic stressors in your life is critical to maintaining mitochondrial capacity, to making sure they don't atrophy and shrivel and die off as you get older.
So when you talk about things, you can add, to like supplements to support the mitochondria, what would some of those be? Yeah.
So there's a few layers that are important to understand when it comes to mitochondria. It used to be thought, if you look at a lot of mitochondrial supplements on the market, it's kind of like cofactors. There'll be some CoQ10 and some B vitamins and, things of that nature, acetyl L-carnitine. And that's good stuff. And those are needed. Those cofactors are very important for mitochondrial energy production. And there's lots of good research to support it. For example, in older adults, we know that just acetyl L-carnitine supplementation can decrease mental fatigue scores and physical fatigue scores by 40 to 60% within a couple months. So just that one supplement alone. CoQ10 has positive research on it. Alpha lipoic acid has very positive research on it, especially when paired with acetyl L-carnitine. But that paradigm of kind of seeing it, that paradigm that leads to those kinds of supplements is largely the paradigm of seeing mitochondria as mindless energy generators. And all we need to do is just provide the right cofactors, and all of a sudden energy turns on. And that's one part of the equation, but it's not the whole picture. Okay. So a couple other layers of this story. One is what I was just talking about with mitochondrial atrophy and the shrinking, the shriveling, the dying off of mitochondria. So another layer is we need to reverse that. We need stuff that stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis, that stimulates our mitochondria to grow bigger and stronger, and also that stimulates our cells to create more mitochondria from scratch. So the good news about all the bad news that I told you earlier, the loss of mitochondrial capacity is that when we age, is that we have mechanisms to also reverse that process and grow more mitochondria. So that's one layer of the story. Another layer is mitochondrial membranes are very, very fragile and susceptible to damage. And so we need to protect and repair those membranes. And so there are specific strategies to do that. And then one other layer of the story that's really important is making sure that the what's called the ARE, the antioxidant response element inside of mitochondria. It's our internal antioxidant defense system to neutralize oxidative stress, which is from all kinds of different stressors, to make sure that's big and robust. And again, that largely comes back to hormetic stress and xenohormetic stress from phytochemicals, certain kinds of herbal compounds. One other layer of the story is called mitophagy. So most people have probably heard of autophagy by now, and this is sort of the breakdown of worn out and dysfunctional cell parts and the rebuilding of new healthy cell parts. We also have something called mitophagy, which is cleaning up our damaged and dysfunctional mitochondria and rebuilding new healthy ones. And that's a really important process that happens at night. Okay, so let me just take you through a few different supplements that act on these different pathways I just mentioned. So cofactors, I mentioned some really good ones are really important ones. B vitamins, having adequate intake of B vitamins, and really all the vitamins, almost every vitamin and mineral plays some kind of direct or indirect role in mitochondrial energy production. So making sure you're nutritionally sufficient, ideally by taking obviously getting the foundation right of your nutrition, but also taking a really good multivitamin and mineral to make sure you're sufficient in all of those compounds is critically important, because we know that a shocking percentage of Americans have at least one nutrient deficiency, like vitamin E, vitamin D. We're talking just in those two, 75-90% of people are deficient in those. If you start looking at all the B vitamins and vitamin A and all these other ones, zinc and selenium and so on, you start to realize that upwards of 50-60% of the population probably have at least 5 or 6 key nutrient deficiencies. So if correcting that, first of all, is critical to just providing all the different cofactors to support all the pathways involved in energy production. That's sort of foundational support. The other cofactors involved directly in energy production, things like CoQ10, things like PQQ is a great one as well. PQQ is, I forget the full name, but it's like pyrroloquinolone quinine, something like that.
And they come together too, right? A lot of the time, like CoQ10 with PQQ.
Right. So that's another one that also stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis. So it also acts on that pathway as well. Alpha lipoic acid, which I mentioned, is a great one. So then mitochondrial membrane support, my two favorites are astaxanthin, which is a carotenoid found, it's found in many different creatures, but originally starts from algae in the oceans, then is consumed largely by krill, and then accumulates in different animals up the food chain. This is what gives salmon its pink color. It's also what gives flamingos their pink color.
Wow.
Cool.
And it just as it bioaccumulates in salmon to the point where it literally turns their muscle pink, it also bioaccumulates in us. So, and if you eat enough of it, theoretically, you turn your tissues pink as well. But this has critical benefits at the mitochondrial level. Side note, it also has great skin benefits. It accumulates in the layers of the skin where it helps protect the skin from UV damage. So it acts as an internal sunscreen. And there's a lot of good research on that as well. But it directly embeds itself in mitochondrial membranes. And unlike most antioxidants, that the chemical structure of them is such that they're either water soluble or fat soluble. So they either sort of seek out inside the cell or inside the mitochondria or outside the mitochondria. Astaxanthin has a very unique chemical structure that actually allows it to embed itself across the mitochondrial membrane from the outside to the inside.
Very cool.
And this stabilizes the membrane in a uniquely powerful way that protects it from damage from oxidative stress. And there's several studies showing that it does that. And more meaningfully, there's also several studies showing that it translates into increased energy levels and improved athletic performance and so on. Another one for membrane support. And I should maybe explain just a little bit. With oxidative stress and inflammation, the mitochondrial membranes themselves, the sort of the wrapping of the mitochondria, become damaged. And as that happens, they're unable to maintain what's called mitochondrial membrane potential. Basically, they become a little leakier and they don't produce energy as well. So repairing those membranes, protecting and repairing them is very important. So another compound that's really powerful for doing this is something most people haven't heard of, and it's called NT factor phospholipids. And it's a unique extract from lecithin where they extract specific phospholipids and then sort of pre-digest them and tie them together with different prebiotics and other sort of antioxidant compounds that protects them from digestion in the stomach. So they arrive to the intestines intact, and then they actually get absorbed into the bloodstream intact and can be delivered directly to mitochondria, where they replace the damaged phospholipids in the membranes of mitochondria. And more importantly than any theory, again, is does the research actually show a practical, meaningful benefit? And we have roughly a dozen studies that have been done on NT factors. You can look it up in a paper called Lipid Replacement Therapy by a researcher named Garth Nicholson, showing in people with chronic fatigue syndrome, in people with chronic fatigue due to aging, in people with chronic fatigue due to obesity, and other kinds of chronic fatigue for like more rare kinds like Gulf War illness and things like that. In all of these studies, very consistently, just this one supplement alone has been found to increase energy levels by 30-40% within a matter of a few weeks. Wow. So that's a very powerful supplement that most people haven't heard of. And it works by, again, repairing mitochondrial membranes.
Can I ask you a question real quick,
Sure.
Ari? Do you have a recommendation of, like, do you carry this, or do you recommend a specific supplement for this? Because I know a lot of people want to know.
Yeah, so it's possible to buy NT factors by itself, but it's one of the ingredients in my mitochondrial formula, Energenesis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to have to dig into that, because everyone's going to want your supplement once they hear that.
After listening to this,
I'm like, where do I get this?
Yeah, it's good stuff. So what I've done with that formula is basically take, over a dozen compounds that each one by themselves has been shown to provide that kind of benefit. Profound increase in energy levels. I mentioned acetyl L-carnitine by itself has been shown in older adults to reduce mental fatigue and physical fatigue by 40 to 60% within a matter of a few weeks, 8 to 12 weeks. So, you take acetyl L-carnitine, you take NT factors, you take astaxanthin to protect the mitochondrial membranes, you take the multivitamin and mineral formula to make sure you're nutritionally sufficient. And the B vitamins are a cofactor for energy production. You put a little CoQ10 in there. A couple others that I like that I'll mention here. Rhodiola rosea is an awesome one. It's often talked about as an adaptogenic herb. A lot of people talk about it in the sort of context of adrenal function. Yeah. There isn't much research to support that. And we could talk a lot about adrenal fatigue and why that's not accurate if you wanted to go there. But rhodiola works at both the mitochondrial level and the brain level in very profound ways. It acts on neurotransmitters in the brain, and it acts directly on mitochondria to stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis. And there's really good research to show in people with burnout syndrome, clinical burnout, stress-related exhaustion, to show that just taking rhodiola rosea can cut fatigue scores in half in between 4 to 12 weeks. So that's another wonderful compound. And I'll mention maybe 2 or 3 others here briefly. Okay. One is called elagic acid, and this is a compound from certain types of foods. It's in small amounts in many different foods like berries and certain kinds of nuts like chestnuts. Pomegranate is uniquely rich in elagic acid, and elagic acid gets converted in the microbiome by certain species of bacteria to a compound called urolithin A. And this compound called urolithin A has been found to be the most potent promoter of mitophagy. This is like autophagy at the mitochondrial level. The most potent compound in stimulating mitophagy that basically ever discovered. So, the animal experiments on that are absolutely remarkable. And there's some human research on it as well. So making sure to have adequate intake of elagic acid, sometimes called elagitannins, is also a really great idea to stimulate, mitochondrial health through that pathway. And then a couple others that I'll mention that most people haven't heard of and that are more unique. One is called calcium AKG, alpha ketoglutarate.
Mhm.
And this is a cofactor involved in the Krebs cycle, which is the Krebs cycle happens sort of in part of the mitochondria, where it produces compounds that are electron carrying compounds that get fed into what's called the electron transport chain in mitochondria. So basically, it's part of the energy generation process. But AKG, it turns out, has all kinds of other functions in the body. And there's a number of studies that have come out now suggesting that it has very profound effects, anti-aging and longevity effects. And the main mechanism that it appears to work through is actually as a mitochondrial hormetic stressor. So it turns out that it basically binds to an enzyme in the electron transport chain in mitochondria called ATP synthase and inhibits energy production at that level. And by virtue of temporarily sort of slowing down the mitochondria and preventing them from producing lots of energy, it stimulate it like a hormetic stress. It stimulates them to adapt and grow stronger to that challenge by, basically through mitochondrial biogenesis. And in the process, you make your mitochondria bigger and stronger and increase their overall capacity to produce energy. So this compound AKG, it also has direct antioxidant effects and decreases DNA damage. And many other effects, but it stimulates mitochondria to grow bigger and stronger. And by virtue of that, makes you have many more mitochondria that are stronger, healthier mitochondria that are capable of producing more energy.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of that explanation. People are going to eat this up. I had a question for you. So I know this is kind of loaded and you went over a lot of the supplements, but what are some ways you personally work on your mitochondria? So especially with the hormetic stress, right?
Yeah.
So what do you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, well, I live in Costa Rica and surfing is a big part of my life.
Ooh.
So almost every morning, pretty much every morning, I go out into the ocean where I'm doing exercise and I'm also playing, which has other effects on optimizing neurotransmitters and various other beneficial effects. I'm getting sun exposure and I'm being challenged in terms of breath holding at times.
Yeah.
So there's several layers of hormetic stress that I'm getting in that way. There's actually a lot going on. There's many layers that are happening in this one sort of seemingly simple act of just going out in the morning, going into the ocean. I'm also getting sunlight in my eyes, which is helping to optimize circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm, in turn, also has a big effect on many energy production mechanisms, neurotransmitters, hormones, and mitochondria. And I'm, again, getting the exercise and getting the mitochondrial biogenesis stimulus. I'm getting UV light on my skin to stimulate, does a few things. It stimulates vitamin D production. It also stimulates a big dump of nitric oxide, which also improves mitochondrial function and blood flow to the mitochondria. And the other aspect that's really interesting, that's more of a new finding. You guys may or may not know, I've written a book on red light therapy. Red and near infrared light therapy.
That. Yeah. I know you've talked about that a lot.
Yeah. So red and near infrared light therapy, you can get therapy devices. I have one behind me that you can see on the floor there.
Yeah.
But we also get those wavelengths of light from sun exposure. And so there's sort of three key mechanisms that you're getting by going out in the sun. Arguably more, but we'll focus on three now. So light through the eyes, feeding back into the circadian clock in the brain, having all this effects on neurotransmitters and hormones and mitochondria indirectly. Vitamin D and nitric oxide from the ultraviolet light hitting the skin. And then the red and near infrared light are penetrating below the skin, deep, like inches deep into the body, where they interact directly with the mitochondria. And they do a few things there. They stimulate the mitochondria to produce energy. They increase levels of growth factors at the tissue level. So these differ depending on what tissue you're talking about. In the brain, you have things like nerve growth factor, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. We have, gland-specific growth factors. We have skin-specific growth factors. It stimulates the skin to produce more collagen, fibroblast activity. And in other tissues, it stimulates growth factors, like in muscle tissue, it stimulates IGF-1, for example. So basically, it's stimulating cellular healing and regeneration. And at the same time, one unique layer to this story is actually melatonin.
Yes.
So melatonin, people often know it as like, oh yeah, that's a sleep supplement. Well, okay, it's a bit more than that, but it's a hormone produced by our brain, by our pineal gland in our brain, that plays a role in sleep. But it turns out that it also has many, many more important aspects to it. It turns out that it's pretty much the most potent mitochondrial antioxidant in existence. And it has a very, very unique capacity to actually penetrate inside of mitochondria and protect them from damage. And that happens, your mitochondria should be getting bathed in melatonin very, very frequently. Now, it turns out there's another really fascinating layer to this melatonin story that is really only sort of very recently emerging. And that is that melatonin isn't only produced by the pineal gland in the brain. It's also produced by the mitochondria throughout the cells of our body. And that mitochondria that's being produced by the mitochondria for the mitochondria in pretty much every cell of your body is actually highly responsive to red and near infrared light. It looks like particularly near infrared light. And so when we are bathing in the sun, we're drenching our cells with this red and near infrared light, which in turn is stimulating the production of melatonin. And that melatonin is then working to bathe the mitochondria and help protect them from oxidative stress and damage all the time.
Very cool.
I feel like it's just recently that people started to notice there's a lot more benefit to melatonin, right, than just sleep.
Not talk about that.
So if you have a red light therapy device and it's small, like I saw the size of yours, and some of them I know they're huge and some are not, is there a specific area that you would like aim it at, or does it not matter?
Well, I actually have a much bigger one, but I let some friends of mine who are staying in the guest house borrow it.
Oh, sorry.
Well, they have COVID right now, and so I was letting them borrow it.
Yeah.
To do a certain protocol that I was recommending to them. So now I'm left with my little small one right now.
So where are you putting that? Where are you pointing that at?
That little thing.
What I want to know.
I really love to pair it with exercise. There's a whole bunch of research showing that when you use it, you can use it both before and after exercise. A few studies even do it during, but after exercise, there's a number of studies that show that it does a few things. It enhances recovery from the exercise, so you recover faster. The tissues heal faster. It reduces inflammation and soreness, and more importantly, it amplifies the adaptations that you stimulated with the hormetic stress of exercise, and that's true both for endurance type exercise as well as weight training, which stimulate different adaptations to some degree. So there's research showing that it increases endurance when paired with endurance activity. There's research showing that it increases strength and muscle mass gain when paired with resistance training. And there was one other thing I was going to say. I think I'm spacing on it now. Oh, yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah. You can use it pre-exercise and it will actually improve it will improve blood flow via
And
nitric
libido,
oxide,
from
most
what I
likely.
hear.
Sounds like you have personal experience there.
No, I don't. I actually read that because I have, whose do I have? I'm drawing a blank of the name, but I have one on their website. You know, when I was learning about it, someone, an influencer was saying that his libido went up.
Nice.
I don't have an issue with that.
Yeah, there's some research. There's some research showing that if you shine it on your genitalia, this is in men, that it can increase testosterone levels.
Yes.
So the other thing, now I remember what I wanted to say, which is also hormonal benefits from exercise. So, for example, improvements in insulin sensitivity. There's studies that show, where they compare an exercise group only versus a group that does the exercise plus red light therapy. And they show that when you add the red light therapy, you get almost double the improvements in insulin sensitivity. So reductions in insulin levels and reductions in blood glucose levels. So basically across the board, it's amplifying the muscle gain, the fat loss, the endurance, the strength, the muscle gain benefits of exercise, and the hormonal benefits of exercise. So it's a really great tool to pair with that. So I would say I use it predominantly there, and maybe a little skin anti-aging as well. Believe it or not, I'm actually
production, right? Like I know some people will use it on their face.
Right. Yeah. Believe it or not, I'm actually 176 years old. And
I've heard that. You look amazing.
You're looking good, bud.
It's all the red
mitochondria.
I love it.
All right. Well, can you talk to us about your energy blueprint and your programs?
Sure. So I have my flagship Energy Blueprint program. It's really a comprehensive lifestyle program. It's very in-depth, everything from circadian rhythm and sleep to nutrition for energy optimization and mitochondrial optimization to light therapies, also talking a lot about different kinds of light deficiencies and toxicities, environmental toxicants and detoxification, gut health, and hormetic stress. So it's very, very in-depth education on sort of everything you need to know to be healthy in terms of optimizing your nutrition and lifestyle. The other program that I recently launched is called Breathing for Energy. And this is in partnership with Patrick McCowan, who is a world-renowned Buteyko breathing expert. And with him, I designed 3 specific tracks, there's a foundational track for generally healthy people who don't have specific problems. And then there's a track for people who suffer from sleep problems, like sleep apnea and breathing issues, or just poor sleep. There's a track for people who suffer from anxiety issues and stress. And there's a track for chronic fatigue syndrome, people who have full-blown ME/CFS. Yeah. And in that track, it's a much more gentle approach to these different breathing practices. And then once you get through the foundational material, the real big feature of the program is 6 levels of intermittent hypoxic training. Hypoxic means low oxygen state. And these are basically breath hold practices, different variations of breath hold practices. And it's a progressive system that's designed to take people from all the way from level 1, which is 10 to 15 second breath holds, all the way up to level 6, which is 3 minutes and beyond. So it's really, and what I've found, to be honest, is especially for people with chronic fatigue, those breathing practices are the single fastest and most powerful way to dramatically increase energy levels with pretty little effort. You can make a really huge shift in your physiology over the course of a month or 2.
Breath work is amazing. I mean, amazing. And I have not even gotten into the breath. I'm of course not going to order your program, but I have not even done that, but just even working with breath work in general, I've seen life-changing things. Yeah. So it's really cool what you can do with that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's been, even for me personally, it's been pretty transformative. For a couple of reasons. One, it makes a huge difference in my endurance performance. So surfing in particular, it makes a big difference. And then surfing also, you know, when you play in the ocean, sometimes, and when the waves are big, you have to be able to hold your breath.
Oh yeah.
True.
And you have to be able to hold your breath while also physically exerting yourself. So sometimes, you know, it gets crazy out there, and you're paddling, you're doing tons of exercise at sort of the limit of your capacity, and you're breathing like this.
Exactly.
You know, and your muscles are consuming huge amounts of oxygen very, very fast. And then you have to hold your breath. Right. And that is a very different animal than holding your breath in a rested state where you're not moving. You know, it's the difference between me being able to hold my breath for 3 minutes versus 10 seconds feeling like a lifetime. You know, it's hard to hold your breath even 10 seconds in that state.
And it's scary. That's why I don't surf.
Yeah. And
I'm no dummy.
We need to work on our hormetic stress. We're going to go surfing.
Yes.
We're diving right in.
There's one other layer that's really cool that I'll mention. When you start to train these different types of hormetic stress consciously, it's a unique opportunity. You're putting yourself consciously, voluntarily into a state of discomfort and stress. And this actually gives a unique opportunity for also training the mind, for training the mind to be calm in a stressed state.
Yeah.
And so putting yourself in a sauna or in a cold bath or in, you know, big scary waves, which is mentally and physically demanding and scary, and training using those opportunities to train your mind to be calm is, in my opinion, one of the most powerful and overlooked aspects of how we can impact our physiology and improve our health. Because the hormetic stress itself is physiologically stimulating your body to grow stronger and become more resistant and resilient in the face of stressors. But we can also do that for our mind at the same time. And that really translates into a level of an ability to handle the stressors of our life while remaining calm in the mind and calm physiologically. So I recommend not only engaging in hormetic stress, but also bringing in that deliberate sort of intention of, I'm going to go in this ice tub, but I'm not just going to go in this ice tub and go, oh my God, shit. I want to get out of here. This is awful.
Really
get me out of this horrible thing. Why am I doing this? But going into that ice tub and being like, and really practicing staying calm, controlling your reactions, controlling your thoughts and emotional response to it, right? That really is a key element you can plug into it. It takes no extra time, but you'll reap big rewards because of it.
Especially anxiety, you know, if anxiety is just a big mind fuck, you know what I mean? So if you can teach yourself to stay calm in certain situations like that, I could see why that would transfer over into reducing anxiety.
Exactly.
Resiliency, building that resiliency. Well, where else can people find you? This has been so great.
TheEnergyBlueprint.com is my website. And, you know, the 2 programs that I mentioned are there. I also have a line of 4 premium supplements that are they're all sort of like 20-in-1 supplements. It's not just 1 or 2 compounds. It's really 15 or 20 or sometimes more ingredients at clinically effective dosages. So a lot of supplement manufacturers are making supplements, so they're putting in, you know, 1/10, 1/20, 1/50 of the actual clinically effective dose of a particular compound. So they have kind of impressive ingredient lists, but for anybody who's sophisticated enough to actually look at the research and realize, you know, look at what is the actual amount that results in a benefit, you realize very quickly that most supplements are very underdosed. Mine are not. And it makes them very, very expensive for me to produce, but it also means that they get people really great results.
It's worth it. There's no price tag on something that's going to actually change your quality of life. And people need to really understand that. So if you were to name the supplements that we specifically spoke about today, is it all getting all 4 of your supplements, or are there 1 or 2 that people could get that you would think would be good to really support the mitochondria? I mean, as far as your products, your specific products.
Right. Yeah. So for mitochondria specifically, I have a formula called Energenesis, and that's got most of the compounds that I just mentioned, other than all the vitamins and minerals. So I have another product called Energy Essentials and Superfoods, and that has it's a premium multivitamin, multi-mineral supplement, and a whole bunch of superfoods, things like spirulina and chlorella and pomegranate for ellagic acid and things like that. So those 2 things would cover you. And then if you have brain specific concerns, you struggle with anxiety, depression, brain fog, things like that, I also have a formula called Ultra Brain that's specific to those issues.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was looking at your stuff and I was like, I want 1 of everything.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really formulated them as my personal dream supplements.
Yeah.
I'm like,
they're really great.
What do I want to take? I want to go create like my dream supplement for this category. So it's not, for me, it's not just like a money-making endeavor. How can I create a line of supplements that's going to sell and put in 1/10 of the real dose? It's like, what's my ultimate brain supplement? What's my ultimate energy and mitochondria formula? I'm going to create that and, focus on creating the best supplement in that category that just no one can compete because they're not willing to spend that much money to create it. From a business perspective, it doesn't make sense to have as small of margins as I have. That's why nobody does it. But that also makes it possible for me to be the one guy who does it,
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. So if yours are really powerful, do you recommend ever dosing like a smaller dose to introduce yourself to it? Is
100%. Yeah.
And usually one new supplement at a time is what we always say too, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. They are very potent formulas and they have a lot of different compounds in them. So I definitely, especially if you're someone that is very chronically ill and you've got gut problems and you've got severe chronic fatigue and that your system is very sensitive, definitely you want to start with a 1/4 dose or a 1/3 of the dose, because they are really, really potent. The positive side is I do have many people who report that, even at a 1/4 or a 1/3 of the proper dose, that's like, they really notice a benefit even at that low of a dose. So you can make the supplement bottle last 3 months instead of 1 month.
Right. Yes. And 2, just, I don't know if people caught what I just said, but try 1 at a time, just because, whenever you're introducing new supplements, you want to know what supplement is more tolerant, if you tolerate better, or if you're having a reaction or whatever, you want to know which one it is. So, So Ari, I hear you have a new book coming out. Can you please tell us a little bit about the book, the title of it, and when does that book come out?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a book coming out with Hay House on May 10th, and I'm very, very excited for it. It's called Eat for Energy, and it's basically all about the science of using nutrition to optimize your mitochondrial function and your energy levels. So that comes out May 10th, and you can pre-order it on Amazon.
Awesome. Do you have, and if you have any special links for that, we'll put them in the show notes for sure, because people always love that stuff. So, all right, well, we can't wait. We can't wait to read your book, and we just had such a great time with you. So thank you so much again for coming on.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it.